All right, welcome everyone to the June 2024 FMDiSC meeting. Good to see a lot of familiar faces from Southern California and all over the world. So it's great to be joining everyone. We are going to jump right into it. Our first presentation is by Caleb Ruth, longtime member of FMDiSC, and he's going to be talking about FileMaker for global health research. Caleb, take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you everybody for attending. It's really nice to see all these old familiar faces I haven't seen in a long, long time. So my presentation is about FileMaker for global health research. My name is Caleb Ruth. My company is Research Allies. And that MS after my name is thanks to this project that I'll be sharing with you today. So, this presentation is a little bit different. It's not going to be a highly technical presentation. It's more sharing this journey that I've been on for quite some time. And, like a lot of us, FileMaker was something that I picked up kind of at random, and projects came to me kind of at random. And one of the most enduring long-term projects that I've had is in the area of global health. And so there's just a definition of what global health is. You may hear me refer to it as clinical research or clinical health, clinical research, global research, global health research. These are all kind of interchangeable terms. Clinical research is just research that centers on humans. Global health, you have the definition there. It's really just about looking at health issues worldwide and looking for good interventions to improve health in our global population. So some examples of what global health might be. So and these are some of the case studies that I'll share today. So education for evidence-based guidelines for healthcare and medical treatment. This is a head trauma case study I'll talk about. Population surveillance to detect nutritional deficiencies and intervention along those lines. Also randomized controlled trials to trial health interventions. Those may be drugs, those may be nutritional supplements. These are all types of global health projects. A core component of global health is capturing data. And so the technical term for that is in the context of our times, electronic data capture, or EDC, which you'll hear me refer to it as. So paper data capture, it's been the traditional mode for data management, data capture since the scientific method was invented. And really a lot of research today is still done on paper. And there are good reasons for that. It's electronic data capture is very complex, and it's not necessarily, tools for it are not necessarily accessible to everybody who is performing this kind of research. So for me, in particular, for my company, my partner, and for those of us, there are others of us in this group who are doing this kind of work, even though there are large competitors for EDC, there is still a great niche for demanding projects that are sort of outside the norm. And so these are the kind of projects that I seek out and look for, and sometimes look for me. So I thought I'd share just the, in the sense of global, right? These are some of the areas that I've been to in the act of deploying these global health research projects. I've come to decide that it's essential that I go to the field site where the research is being conducted at least once to meet the people, experience the environment, You know, as we all know, building data management tools, we need to know like what's going on. You know, a lot of times people will try to talk us out of speaking to the actual end users, right? And I think in this context, it's even more important to understand because there are language barriers, there are cultural barriers, there are just all sorts of differences in all these places. So from the upper left, those 7 hearts are actually from one project in Central Europe, going from the Baltics all the way down to the Balkans. Then I've had several projects in India. The left heart is in Mumbai and the right is in Chennai. Multiple projects in both those locations. The lower left is in Uganda and one project there, and then several projects. The rightmost heart is in Thailand, several projects there. I've also had a couple of projects in South America, and for the most part, these are all based in the United States. So you can imagine that, you know, data accessibility is a really critical part of this for the people running the research. Now it's executed, it's run, the programs are run by people on the ground, but a lot of times the funding will be coming from US institutions, US government, or in partnership with local governments. That was the case in Uganda. It was a partnership with local governments. In Europe, it was a partnership with an NGO that had very, very close ties to Central Europe. It was a multinational NGO. And in Thailand, it's this 3-component partnership between United States University, the US Air Force, as well as the Thai government. So I want to rewind all the way back to 1997, because this is where I got my start. What happened was just a short, funny story. I was doing some work, just some random work. So I was 1997, geez, I've been working with FileMaker for maybe like 2 or 3 years. And, well, no, less, 2, at the most 2 years. And I was working for this guy who just, you know, I was doing some invoicing thing or something like that. And one day he said, so, you know, my brother-in-law, he hired these guys to do this data system for this research project in Europe, and it's not going very well. Would you mind talking to him? This turned into a 4-year, very intense project and my first experience with global health. And it led to everything I've been doing since then. So I'm going to read you a quote. This is a quote by me. This is a quote from my thesis, from the introduction of my thesis. It goes, "As the fluorescent lights flickered and the flies buzzed, my eyes traced the path of the catheter as it emerged from a hole drilled in the man's bandaged head and led to an open glass jar under his hospital cot. His swollen brain was squeezing cerebral spinal fluid from the ventricles in his brain. The murky liquid gathered in the glass jar under his bed. This was late 1997 in post-Soviet Eastern Europe. The man in front of me on the cot was a victim of head trauma, an everyday accident for ordinary people. He was one of several similar patients in the ICU of this teaching hospital in Ljubljana, Slovenia. The hospital was struggling to provide adequate care. The neurosurgeons and other attending physicians gathered around the patient and reviewed his medical chart on a clipboard, while a neurosurgery resident used a new IBM ThinkPad laptop to enter medical data into the Traumatic Brain Injury Survey database. So that was the database I built, the Traumatic Brain Injury Survey database. And this was because the people that had tried to do it with a non-FileMaker solution had completely dropped the ball and failed in their effort. 2 weeks before they were due to deploy the study throughout Central Europe, I got this phone call. Can you do this in FileMaker? Is it even possible? And can you do it in 2 weeks? And by the way, do you have a passport? I said yes. And that led to where I am today. So I won't talk too much about this project, except that it's where I got my start in this field, because it's so long ago and technology has changed so much since then. But this is just the idea of the equipment and the technology that we were using back then. internet was really, you know, I mean, most of you can remember, many of you maybe can remember back this far. Internet was not great. It was mostly dial-up back then, especially in Central Europe. And these resource constrained areas is definitely the specialty where where I focus on, and where I find that I'm able to deliver the most value. So it was a challenge back then, but you know, we did it. We did what we could, and it was a totally different environment. So fewer regulations. It was really very innovative and groundbreaking back then. But FileMaker Pro 3, right? That was where we were back in 1997. And CDML, who remembers CDML? I love that language. For those of you who don't know, CDML was FileMaker's, well, Claris back then. It was Claris back then before it went to FileMaker. It was the Claris development markup language, and it allowed you to make web pages that interacted with FileMaker. Quite the technology.
I loved it too.
We
Yeah,
all
it was
did.
great. Simple. Wasn't it awesome? So, okay, so this is just another map of where this project was. 7 locations throughout Central Europe. I visited at least, well, probably a couple of times per year to various sites, delivering new versions or deploying new hospitals, deploying the solution to new hospitals. Real quick, what it was a well, I'll fast forward to the next slide. So what it was a project to build evidence for evidence-based guidelines for the treatment of severe head injury. And so there are these systematic reviews, is what we call them now. But back then, they just would read through all the literature and they would come up with what they believed were best practices for clinical treatment of certain conditions, this specific one being head trauma. So then they published the guidelines, what they believed were the best practices for treatment, and then they would need to develop evidence for that to show that, you know, actually following the guidelines did improve outcomes for patients of these conditions. So in terms of the technology, it was FileMaker 3. That was the first relational version of FileMaker. We did not have multiple tables within one file at the time. So what I did in the solution was I built it as a single file solution with one single table, and each of the X's there that you see represents a sort of a pseudo relationship to, well, it was a relationship, but it was to the same, it was a self join. So what I had was one extremely wide table that was itself comprised of essentially multiple tables. And those, through relationships, I was able to keep that data segregated from one another. What would happen is they would click that output button on the right, and it would create an export file, and then they would email that to New York City, where the research was based and centered out of. This is, of course, before HIPAA. There were no regulations on data sharing, data privacy, data security, that sort of thing. So real quick, what is clinical research? So there are study protocols. Well, I don't want to read through all this stuff. You can skim through it. Most of it is self-explanatory, but the point is that it is really complex requirements, but there are a lot of shared, there are shared requirements, not in terms of specifics, but in terms of the overall structure of what clinical research is. And so because of that, after that initial project ended in 1999, the dot-com era hit, I saw some writing on the wall about where that project was going, and saw some opportunities in .com, and so I actually shifted out of FileMaker for a couple of years. And so fast forward to 2015, and I got another call. And this was a call by a professor at Cornell University, And he just happened to be a random guy calling a random FileMaker developer who he thought could help with his research. He had no idea that I had this 4 years of experience back, 15 years ago. Clinical research hasn't really changed a whole lot, but data management sure has. So that was the advent of Connect. So Connect, so again, EDC stands for electronic data capture. And Connect is the combination of connecting researchers to their data, connecting researchers to EDC. So that's how I came up with that name. So far, we have conducted, I think, 8 studies with Connect. And we're currently about to launch a new study with Connect version 2. So here is version 1 of Connect. This is what I developed in 2015. It's just the front page of it, just a participant list. And this is obfuscated data. This is not actual participants. This is anonymized, and as you can see, sample 1, sample 2, etc. So this one, boy, this actually took a lot longer than 2 weeks. The first one in 1997 took, I banged that out in 2 weeks and flew off to Hungary. This one took me probably close to, I don't know, 6 or 8 months to build this whole thing, because I was in the process of building a framework based on all of these components of clinical research. I also had to do a lot of research myself just about the regulatory environment, because since I don't remember when exactly HIPAA was passed, but even subsequent to HIPAA, more regulations have been passed. And so it's very important, obviously, to be compliant with those. But at the same time, I did a lot of research to fill in the gaps of my knowledge about what clinical research is and all the different components of it. So that first study with Connect was 2015 or so. So it was probably 16 by the time we got it off the ground. And the question here, so clinical research, it's always looking at a question, right? There's a hypothesis, and you're testing the hypothesis. That's the way science works, right? You come up with a hypothesis and then you test it. So the hypothesis here was that, well, to phrase it as a question, can biofortified crops provide the same nutritional benefits as traditional nutrient fortification? And if yes, then can it be a cheaper method of delivering nutritional supplementation? So you think of bread, you go to the store and you buy some flour. I don't know, you look at the label and it says fortified with iron, niacin, whatever, right? It has these nutrients added to the flour. So that is a fortified food. You can think of salt. Table salt is fortified with iodine for people that don't get enough iodine in their diet. So we in the Western world, we eat plenty of fortified food. And there are severe nutritional deficiencies throughout the world that are being addressed with nutrient fortification. And the question is there a better way of delivering it? So there are a few companies that are engineering biofortified crops. What that means is that the crop itself is grown with the nutrients. It absorbs those nutrients as it grows. So you don't fortify it after the grain is milled. Those fortifications are actually in the grain itself. So this was multiple biofortifications. I don't remember which nutrients they were, but is it as effective as traditional nutrient fortification? Turns out it is. So that was great news. That was the outcome of that study. This is the environment that this study took place in. So a highly dense urban environment in Mumbai, India. Very, very poor, extreme. These are subsistence living people. On the left, you can see it's essentially a shanty town. On the right-hand side is the principal investigator of the study and 2 of the research coordinators. I took the photo, so I'm not in it. But you can just see that, there are some very difficult living conditions in the world. And the big issue is, when people, I mean, this is obvious, right? But without proper nutrition, lifespans are reduced, health is reduced. And so, it is very, well, I feel like it's a really rewarding, it's very rewarding to have a role in this kind of thing. A second study was this environmental determinants of Kaposi sarcoma herpes virus. So KSHV is the condition. Kaposi sarcoma is a type of cancer, and it's a very common virus. In fact, the odds are that some of us here have this virus, but we're not sick from it because our immune systems are strong. But if we have diseases that compromise our immune systems, then we can get life-threatening cancer from this virus. And so one of the things that can there are several things that can severely compromise your immune system in Africa. One of them is HIV, and the other is malaria. And so this study was looking at, does exposure to malaria specifically increase your susceptibility to the virus? And if that's true, then if we can prove that, then the governments can put more effort, more money into mitigating and malaria prevention and treatment. The results of that, I think, are still out. We don't have a conclusion on that one yet. So this is the environment that one took place, extremely rural, farmland. So on the left is just a picture of the environment. I don't think I saw a single paved road in Uganda. That's probably not true, but certainly not anywhere near where we were. I'm sorry, that's not true. There is a highway of sorts that goes east to west in Uganda. That's how I got from the capital to Chamalibwa. That's the name of the village where this research was focused. So this research focused in sort of a catchment area around this village of something like 20 kilometers radius around this area. And I guess I should mention at this point, the idea of Connect, why some of the other EDC solutions don't work in this kind of environment is because they're all web-based. The number one EDC is called RedCap. It's very highly supported. Well, I wouldn't say highly supported, but it's highly used in academia. It has something like, it has thousands of research institutions that have licenses for it. It was developed by Vanderbilt University. It's got a lot of backing, and it does have a mobile platform, but it has its weaknesses, right? And that mobile platform is one of them. And so with FileMaker, with iPads, with syncing, we can conduct research in places like this where there is no internet until you get to the Wi-Fi of the health center, which is the picture on the right. That's the team of nurses who conduct the research holding their iPads. And after we got done for the day, we all played a game of volleyball and they kicked my ass. That was their evening recreation. There are advantages beyond the reward of the work itself. Not very far, well, a few hours drive from Chamalibwa is the Mgahinga Gorilla National Park in Uganda, where I got to hike pre-dawn in the rain, hike up through the jungle, up the mountainside for a few hours, and with a bunch of people, a bunch of tourists, but also a bunch of Army Army soldiers who were our guides. So it was a combination of naturalists who were, well, they were all armed actually, because guerrilla poaching is a thing in Africa. And so they were guarding us, and they were also guarding the gorillas. We were not far from the Congolese border, and so there were, there are security issues there. But I can say, wow, this is one of the most amazing experiences I've had. Mark is the hominid behind me, and he was the silverback of an entire gorilla family who are off camera, but were all around me at that point. You shouldn't get any closer than I was to Mark or to any of the gorillas. They were the gentlest, most peaceful animals, just sitting there munching leaves. Of course, they're habituated, right? They're used to tourists coming to see them. They really couldn't care less that we were there. Very, very rewarding experience. Okay, so fast forward to 2022. And that's when I realized that, okay, actually, I could probably make a business out of this. And move on from, so previous to 2015, I had focused on healthcare solutions, EMRs, but that business was really dwindling. I had good business in that for several years, but pretty much by this point, there are big off-the-shelf solutions that can handle almost any clinical practice. And so that was just a declining business. However, global health, clinical data capture, it still is I would say, a vibrant niche for specifically for the very difficult and challenging research that's being done, whether it's an extremely complex protocol or just in a very remote area. Basically, when people need support, this is when they can call us, Research Allies. My partner Jesse and I formed Research Allies in 2022. I transferred Connect from my old company to Research Allies, and this is now our primary business. So just a quick walkthrough of Connect V2. So there's a dashboard, it has an agenda. These research protocols have schedules, so scheduled visits that per participant, you need to collect. As an example, you might have a person that is eligible for the study, and you need to have a very strict regimen of investigation for that participant over, let's say, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, something like that. And at each of those visits, you have a certain schedule of forms that need to be filled out for that participant. And that will be different. The forms filled out on month 1 may be different than the forms filled out on month 2. Now, in this particular screenshot, this is for a protocol where there are actually 3 types of visits. There are visits for entire families, which is the little icon with the kid in the middle. So that would be a schedule where the form needs to be filled out for every member of the family. The row with a house icon, that's for every member in a household, which is different than a family potentially. And then you have a schedule for participants, individuals, in other words, based on certain criteria. So a pregnant woman, for example, would have a different protocol than a 15-year-old boy, just as an example. The basis for clinical research is CRF, that stands for Case Report Form. I noticed Jeremy Brown is on the call today. Jeremy was very instrumental in the section in the lower right-hand corner, the JSON form schema that we use a library, a JavaScript library called Survey.js. This was a part of the rebuild for Connect version 2. Where in version 1, we would develop a table for every form, a table in FileMaker for every form, and then design a layout for every single form. But for anybody who's developed forms in FileMaker, there are lots of limitations about doing it natively in FileMaker. So Survey.js is a JavaScript library that lets you build. It's a form design tool, and its output is a form schema in JSON format. So Jeremy Brown helped with pulling in the rendering engine for Survey.js into FileMaker, into a web viewer, so that then we feed the form schema to that and it renders the form. You fill out the form in the web viewer, you click the complete button at the bottom, and then the output of that is another JSON schema of the response to the form. So then obviously it's a simple matter of parsing that response to get it into any other data format that we want. So this is the list of partial list of some of the forms in the Thailand study. And so we have a download button for the data definition, the data element definition for the form. That goes into producing the data dictionary for the study, which is important at the last step when it comes back to analysis, because a lot of elements in the form may be coded, variables are named, and so the data definition is what the analysts will use on the back end for the end result to analyze the outcome of the study. The scheduler is kind of the heart of the whole system, where you can define which visits or which encounters you would have with participants, families, households, that sort of thing. And so we've had to build quite a complex scheduling system. We have repeating events. We have these contingencies about, okay, which group is it a part of? Is it for the participant, a family, or a house? What type of event is it? Is it a visit event? Do you make a phone call for this event? Is it a repeating event? And what when you toggle that repeating event button, there's a whole section on defining the repeating event. Scheduled or PRN. PRN stands for, maybe somebody can correct me, pro re nata, Beverly or Beatrice, you probably know. I think that's what it means, or that's the actual term. What it means is as needed. So it's not a scheduled event, but you can create it anytime you need. So for example, in the case of a pregnant woman, you can't schedule that typically. So in the case of that being reported, you would choose from the PRN menu, okay, oh, I'm sorry, not pregnancy, but delivery of the baby. Well, pregnancy too, for that matter. You don't schedule that. So some events are scheduled and some are PRN. So eligibility is the final part of the sort of protocol that I'll discuss, the clinical research protocol. And this is just about defining, okay, who is eligible for the study. Not everybody is eligible for the study. Maybe you're too young, maybe you're too old, maybe you don't have any of the conditions that are vulnerable for a certain, for the study or for the point the study is looking at. And so this is a flexible part of the framework where you can essentially write a calculation. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't show one of the actual calculations, but essentially you can reference any of the CRFs and any of the elements within the CRF. So you define which visit, because the forms may be repeating throughout the study. So you say, okay, we want to look at the screening visit. We want to look at the anthropometry form, and we want to know, okay, is this person, underweight, overweight, what age, this sort of thing. And finally, consent is also a critical part of clinical research to protect participants. There's a sordid history in the US, in Germany from World War II era, but post-World War II, even in the US, of vulnerable groups being exploited for clinical research with some horrible outcomes. You may have heard of some of the human trials that were conducted by Nazi Germany, but almost as bad were the Kandinsky syphilis trials, where they used prison inmates and intentionally infected them with syphilis. This was in the United States in the, I don't remember. It was in the 20th century, post World War II, if you can believe it. So now there are very specific guidelines about how to conduct research. And the most important part of it is informed consent. So everybody gets a briefing. There are very specific rules about what to communicate to participants. And inclusive of that is you won't be compensated because that could influence somebody's decision to participate, other than perhaps a nominal like transportation fee if a visit needs to be made to a clinic or something like this. And you can withdraw at any time with no hard feelings, right? So, and there are many components to the informed consent. They get a complete education of how they will be treated during the course of the trial or the study, as well as why the study is being done in the first place. Okay, so this is a study that we're coming up on. This is what Connect V2 is developed for. This is a 5-year family cohort study to look at dengue fever. Dengue fever, like malaria, is a huge problem in the tropics. It's also called hemorrhagic fever. There are various extremes of infection that you can have, to the point of from no symptoms at all, like you may not even know that you have dengue fever, to bleeding from your orifices to dying. So it's a full extreme. You can also get it multiple times in your life. It's said that most people who live in these tropical areas have had it. And so the question is, how common is, and the question for this particular family cohort study is, there are several questions. One of them is, how common is inherited immunity from dengue fever from a mother to a child? Also, how common is it for people of the same household to be infected in the same at the same time? In other words, like if you have, so dengue is, it's a mosquito-borne illness, but it doesn't originate in the mosquito, it originates in humans. So a mosquito will bite an infected person, and then it will go bite somebody else, and that's how dengue will be transmitted. It's the same with malaria. These mosquitoes don't create the disease or the bacterium or the virus. Malaria is a bacterium, dengue is a virus, but mosquitoes are just the, unfortunate harbingers or vector, as it were. So this currently is an extension of a previous 5-year study to expand the scope, expand the population that's being investigated, and just to continue researching these issues. And then there will be a follow-up starting in 2015. Well, not a follow-up so much as an extension, where they'll be testing a new dengue vaccine. There's currently 3 prominent strains of dengue fever, and there is no trivalent vaccine for dengue. And in fact, there's no really effective vaccine for dengue. So starting next year, there will be a trivalent vaccine that we will be conducting the study for. This is Kampeng Phet, Thailand, family cohort study. This is the study from the previous slide. So I wanted to kind of give a balance of environments. So the first one in Mumbai was extremely urban. Second one in Uganda was the exact opposite, rural environment. And Kampeng Phet is a suburban environment. It's a city in Thailand. It has around 100,000 people. It's not a large city by Asian standards. It's a fairly spread out area. And one feature of a lot of people's households is a spirit house in the front yard, which is a place to honor your ancestors. A part of a spirit house is also to have a small vessel of water. So mosquitoes love to breed in water. So unfortunately, the Thai culture, works very well for mosquitoes, not very well to work against dengue and other mosquito-borne diseases. One thing I wanted to mention, so this is just a picture on the left of a typical household. Let's see, is a spirit house? No, you can't really see a spirit house in that front yard. But like typically behind that gate, they would have this tall, very ornate it's about the size of one of those columns, and it's just a pedestal, and it has sort of an ornate house on top, just a model, small model house. That's the spirit house. And then on the right is the picture of the clinical team. These are all nurses and the medical director of the facility. And then I'm in there, and my partner Jesse is there as well. So I would say let's see, all of these studies, let's see, well, not including the Mumbai study, we did not have well, we did have a local partner in the Mumbai study, but they were not really involved in the research specifically. They were more sort of local orientation and contact. They were a teaching hospital, but they did not take an active role participating with us. Whereas in Uganda, as I showed the photo, the nurses were all, they were the active research associate staff conducting the study. And here, this is definitely the largest staff I've ever worked with on a research project. These guys, wow, so professional, so on the ball. They've been doing this study for 5 years already. They've been doing it on paper. So they are very excited to be moving to electronic data capture. And I can say I learned a ton from these people. It's always very difficult, as you all know, to come up with a new workflow, to adapt your system, or customizing or building a new system. And, we all know how important the right partners are. I just want to say these guys are great. I'm so happy to be working with them. Okay, so what am I delivering for them or we, Jesse and myself, in partnership with them? What are we delivering for them? So with Connect version 2, we're expanding a bit. With Connect 1, it was mainly just the EDC function, protocol adherence. With this one, their demands were a little more. They've had a lot more experience. This is a long-term study that they're continuing. They've already been doing it for 5 years. They know what they need. So these other 4 bullets are what they asked. Well, the 3 bullets following EDC are what they asked for. The quality assurance dashboard, so that they can go in and review what data has been captured. A lab dashboard, so that they can export so part of the study is collecting biological samples. That's blood, saliva, sometimes urine, stool, these kind of things. These are captured in sample containers. They're barcoded. And so each day the lab will receive these samples. They'll all be barcoded. And then from Connect, they export the daily record, right? So they can import that into their lab management system. And then a monitoring dashboard allows the PIs, the PI stands for Principal Investigator. There's one PI in Thailand, and then there's another PI in, like I said, a lot of these are conducted from the United States. And in this case, there are 2 PIs. One is in Thailand, and one is at Upstate Medical University in Syracuse, New York. And so for her, she has essentially when this study was being conducted by paper, she has no visibility of how things are going, none at all, other than a weekly check-in with the team in Thailand. So the monitoring dashboard will show statistics like who's been enrolled, who's been screened, who's been enrolled, who wasn't enrolled for some reason or another. How is quality assurance? How is the protocol? How is the adherence to the protocol going? Were visits missed? Were forms missed? These sort of statistics will be shown in the monitoring dashboard. And then in innovation, I don't know, I think it's an innovation. It's not in the sense of data management, or a data pipeline is nothing new in data management, but a research data pipeline, I think, is a relatively novel concept. I'm not going to claim to have invented it, but I think that we're putting pieces together that maybe were fractured before and not connected. The idea being that you have data which is generated, captured, it goes through a QA process for review. Then that data gets processed into a data set that's available for analysis. And then finally, that data gets stuck into a data repository so that the analysts can perform their analysis of it. And that's what the unified research data pipeline is for. I had a whole diagram of it, but I decided not to include it for you. Just maybe I should have, but I thought I might be running long on time. So there we are. We thank you for your attention. Happy to share and happy to answer any questions or hand the mic back. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Caleb. That was excellent. Very, very interesting journey, so to speak, that you've been on. It's funny, you're talking about the first project you did back in the 90s. And they said, can you do it? And can you do it in 2 weeks? I think I certainly know that I took on many things early in my FileMaker career that I would shudder to contemplate taking on now. But somehow the world seems simpler. And certainly our tool was simpler. And so it's kind of like, well, this is the only way we can do it. We make a wide table and a self join, and it's got to work, or whatever the situation was. But I certainly think we've all been there. Certainly people have been around a long time of taking on something without really understanding all the complexities of it. But you know what? Making something that worked and helped people do their jobs and save them compared to how they were doing it otherwise, huge amounts of time and money and extra labor and all that. So yeah, it was just interesting to see that.
Yeah, I always love sharing that anecdote, because I mean it's such a win for FileMaker, right? But I think you're right. If somebody came to me and said, "Can you do it in 2 weeks now?" I don't know, maybe there are younger people in the audience who might say yes, but yeah, different time, right?
All right. Well, what's that? How do you get wiser by making mistakes and all of that thing? Other questions for Caleb?
Well, a comment and a question, Caleb. But that's one of the most interesting FileMaker group presentations I've seen, and probably one of the only technical FileMaker presentations that was also served as a travel log to exotic places. So I particularly enjoyed that element. It sort of rang a bell for me in that my career working for nonprofit organizations started when I was called in to look at a ClarisWorks database that the person that set that up was having trouble printing mailing labels. And that led, I said, hey, you could be doing a lot more with this database than you're doing now. And that's led to an ongoing and now a 22-year association with this organization. Again, it's an organization that in the social services sector, it does a lot of good in the world. So it makes me happy that I can apply what meager skills I've developed over the years in FileMaker to do good in the world. And I'm glad that you seem to have found a similar career path, which has led to doing a lot of good in the world. So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks so much for the compliment, and nice to see you again.
Yeah, I remember we used to travel together to the occasional FMDiSC meeting when they were actually held in person live in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I remember well.
I see
Frank has his hand up.
Yep.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Frank.
Thank you, Caleb, for
Frank, sorry, I just want to mention before you arrived, Beatrice and well, there's several, and Beverly and anybody else. We were all talking about the FileMaker research user group, and thank you again for hosting that and running that as long as you did.
You're most welcome. It was my pleasure, and thank you for talking about it. Thank you for remembering that. It's yeah, I don't want to invest time in it, but I think, yeah, it is a pity that it just didn't take off as I was hoping, and I think other people were hoping as well. Thank you for your presentation. I found it super interesting. Well, most people probably don't know me, but I am very interested in making FileMaker applications for nature conservation, which shares the feature that often it takes place in what you call resource low environments. So I found it super interesting to see, and I love your layouts. They are so clean and lean and still pretty. So I think I commented on you on that before. I think less is more, and like I said, there's a whole lot less here, and is still super functional. I have one question. No, two questions and one remark. Let's start with the remark. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the research pipeline, it does exist in research.
Yeah.
I interviewed once an astronomer or two, and they have research pipelines for all the data that comes from their satellites and other machines. So it's a very common, but I think what is new is that you put it into what is it? Type of data capture that is not machine generated, right? So this is people
okay.
working and generating. So maybe there it is new. I don't know. There was a screen where you have eligibility criteria and where people can formulate something to eval. Sorry, I don't remember the exact phrasing, but I assume that people have to write a FileMaker calculation there.
So
Or how does
so
that? How does it
evaluate-
work? And
so
who does
evaluate
the
eligibility.
writing? Yeah,
Yeah,
who
I do
does
that.
you do?
I do
Okay.
that.
So
Yeah.
the researchers would have to need you to enter that each time when they come up with a new set of eligibility criteria.
I think there's probably a way, I've been doing, like I said, we used to do all the forms as FileMaker layouts. And the idea behind that was that I could provide layout privileges to a user, and then they could tell me the fields. Sorry, I'm getting a complaint back here. And stop it. Sorry about that. I'm on this journey to put as much in the hands of the researchers as possible. And the huge step that I've done to this point is the designing of the forms. Designing the forms, there is so much back and forth, so many revisions, so much. It was just a killer to have me be doing that. And any kind of advanced layout, hiding and stuff like this, I would always be doing that stuff. And even if I would give somebody privileges for layout design, they still need to know FileMaker, right? So with this Survey.js form building tool, oh my God, it is saving so much time and effort to put that into their hands. The eligibility, so I didn't mention this specifically, but the research protocol is a quite specific thing when these research projects are funded by grants. And in order to get a grant, you need to know exactly what hypothesis you're testing. And you also need to propose a very, very specific testing protocol. Frank knows this, and the other researchers in this group know this. But as a part of that, you also need to delineate or define your eligibility criteria. So these are pretty hard coded in advance. So there's not very much back and forth on this. If it is, it's, okay, we might need to use this variable instead of that variable. But I find that it's not such a big deal for me to go through their documented protocol and then create the eligibility criteria. What I did do to make it easier for myself was I built this in the framework context so that I choose which visit it's for, I choose which form it's from, and then I'm just looking at local variables. And then, yes, I need to construct a formula for that, but it's essentially what's the variable name, and is it greater than, okay, here's an example. If their blood pressure is high, if they're hypertensive, if they have high blood pressure, they're not eligible, just an example. So, okay, so systolic is higher than 80 and systolic is higher than 130 and diastolic is greater than 80. Okay, high blood pressure. So it's just simply that, systolic is greater than 130 and diastolic is greater than 80, then they're ineligible. So
Yeah.
the formula is as simple as that.
But how would you hand that over to the researchers themselves if you or did you think about how that could be possible? Because I'm thinking they would have to know the internal workings of your database unless you have a solution for it, of course.
Well, remember, they're designing the forms, so they're defining the variables. So there is a library of variables. We know what form it is because they're choosing that from a dropdown. And so we can extract what variables are on that form. So we could do kind of like FileMaker's calculation dialog. We could do something similar to that, where we have a list of elements, variables with operators, and then they could build a formula themselves. That's essentially all I'm doing. I just know what the variable names are in advance.
Okay, thank you. I will rest my second question or ask it later if there's time left.
So we have two other questions, then I think we need to wrap up. So we had Tony and then Ian.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I very much enjoyed the presentation. I feel like I'm better traveled than I was just a short time ago. Hey, Caleb, two things that you mentioned that resonate deeply with me. One was the idea of nutritional supplement and food. So I dropped a link earlier, which some people might have missed, to a book that I read. Even as a city slick, I very much enjoyed a book, Secrets of the Soil, which many topics. One of them was just making sure soils are very mineralized, fully mineralized, not just the NPK. And I think that's relevant not just in foreign lands, but also for Americans, Europeans, and so forth. The second thing, I looked for a link years ago. I read a book by the Grain and Salt Society. I couldn't find a link. It essentially made the assertion that industrial salt production removes the minerals to sell them separately as supplements, and we are all well advantaged to consume, some sort of Celtic sea salt or perhaps Himalayan salt. I like Celtic sea salt to get a fully mineralized things with all the micronutrients and whatnot. Anyway, that's just a shout out for those two thoughts, the book and the salt. And I just very enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely criticisms. I mean, we're talking about an industry of research. I didn't talk about big pharma. I don't work with big pharma because they fund their studies with millions of dollars and they have their own tools for it. So that is not at all. You didn't bring it up. I'm not suggesting you did, but I think there are definitely criticisms to be aimed to a certain extent with certain angles of research. But in general, I feel really good about the people that I'm working with and the communities that are being affected by these, in some cases, really, really, serious health issues. So thanks for that comment.
I bet.
All right, and then Ian with our last question or comment.
Really, really awesome presentation, Caleb. Thanks. So about 10 years ago, I did a system that basically was for doctors going to Africa to do medical research on wound treatment. And it was sort of funny, but really annoying to our client, because what happened was they gave all these doctors iPads with the software on it. Then the night before they all flew off to Africa, all the doctors went home and synchronized their music to their iPads and basically overwrote all the software. So they basically went to Africa with iPads for music, but FileMaker had now been removed. So how did you?
Amazing.
It's a dumb question, but how do you avoid that thing?
Yeah, well, okay. I have experimented with MDM and I don't like it. I don't like it. So what I can say is nurses are much more disciplined than doctors, and I don't deal with doctors.
For sure.
Yeah, it's an issue. I've tried all of the MDMs that I'm aware of, and I haven't found.
Yeah, just define MDM, just in case anyone's not familiar.
Oh, what is it? Mobile device management. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, so it's a way you install a profile, and it allows you to restrict what's installed or removed, or it allows you to basically control the environment on the iOS device. And so we've experimented with a few different solutions, and I don't know. basically we delivered the iPads, we set them up ourselves, and they're kept on site in a locked cabinet when they're not in use. And like I said, in Thailand, these people are so professional. And really, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer, Ian, other than to say I haven't run into any serious problems. The biggest issue I do run into, though, is like, when people get these devices and they're moving from paper traditional data capture into electronic data capture, their idea, their imagination is huge for what can be done, but we do run into practical limitations. So I get a lot of requests for, can we videotape the consent process? Like I mentioned, informed consent is a hugely important part of introducing a new participant into a study. And different governments have different requirements for how to conduct that process. And in India specifically, the health authorities want that entire process to be videotaped because a lot of the population in India is illiterate. And so they, a written piece of paper with a signature or a thumbprint is not necessarily good enough documentation. So I have to say, you need to come up with another solution, because we can't have the informed consent process in video for 500 people. Yeah, I didn't talk about the scale of these studies in terms of participants, but they're regularly hundreds and hundreds of people that we're tracking in this. So to have an informed consent process videotaped and stored for hundreds and hundreds of people, it doesn't work with our capacity for these iPads. So
that kind of thing is I've got several friends who are epidemiologists, and so yeah, and my partner Anna, who I think you met in Berlin a couple of years ago, is does human genetics, and so yeah, that's very, very, very aware of that kind of issue.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyway, awesome presentation. Thank you.
Yeah,
thanks, Ian.
We should wrap it up there, but thank you, Caleb. That was really interesting and obviously very thought-provoking, and prompted a lot of reflections and questions. So really appreciate your taking the time to share the journey with us.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Of course. Next up, we have our recurring segment with Chris Moyer, the Tech News Roundup. And then we actually have, and maybe it would just be easier to sort of combine these two. Chris and Caleb and Heidi, and I think Ian and several other people possibly were just in Berlin for the Dot FMP. So they're going to share their sort of news from the front, anything that was interesting there that they saw. So Chris, just, I'll leave it to you. You go through your roundup, and then you can just transition into a discussion of Dot FMP.
Sure, and I stuck a couple of slides on at the end that'll actually make that transition for us. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So welcome to the June Tech News Roundup. There's been a ton of stuff going on, ransomware attacks and stuff like that. I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff, though. The big news, obviously, is FileMaker 21, or sort of dubbed 2024, was released on June 4th. And that's a much larger topic than for me to do a detailed breakdown of that here. One thing that I do want to sort of mention is that, at the Engage earlier, there was a lot of talk about sort of the looming AI capabilities and stuff like that. And I actually have a screen grab from the under the hood session about the architecture of the thing and how the AI features have been implemented. And when 21 was released, if you notice right here, I think you can see my mouse, we have this LLM access layer, and we have a OpenAI GPT handler, an Anthropic handler, and an Open handler. When this was released, we only got this one. And so that was just sort of noticed by, lots of people in the community, like, we only have OpenAI stuff here. So presumably, since he's talking about it, and this is part of the architecture, this other stuff is still in there, and we'll get access to it at some point. But it's just worth noting that as of right now, it's the OpenAI endpoint compatibility that we have. And so some of these, I think Wim put out a blog post about how you can sort of hack your way to this and get some of these other services using by sort of receiving the football and then creating your own OpenAI compatible endpoint as a workaround for this. But it's a little clunky right now, and hopefully it'll get better later. But that's all I wanted to say about that. And then much more to come on this topic and all the features that are in it and so forth. Speaking of AI, I don't know how many, would guess most people on the meeting here have heard of Copilot and GitHub and Microsoft buying GitHub and Copilot. Microsoft has since taken Copilot from what sort of started out as a code assist tool to generalize it. And now they have Copilot for Microsoft 365. And so you can, be on a Teams meeting and have Copilot engaged. You can have, PowerPoint, all their Office 365 apps have Copilot synergies built in now. The interesting thing to me is that, arguably the most codey or techie application they have, Microsoft Excel, only is in a preview state of Copilot. And so, you can do all the stuff with Visual Basics and zillions of calculations and stuff like that. And that one's in sort of Copilot preview. So that's one thing. Another thing is that they thought it would be a cool idea if they introduced this new feature called Copilot Plus Recall. And basically what Recall does is, like, every so many seconds, let's say 30 seconds, it will take a screenshot of what you're working on. And if you're one of those people who likes to have 50 web tabs open all the time, or if you're in a ton of meetings and stuff like that, it may be difficult for you to say, what was I working on last Tuesday? And, maybe around after lunch. And having this, it's almost like time machine. You can sort of flip back through time and say, this is what I was looking back last Tuesday at 1 o'clock. The problem with this is that all this stuff is stored. And this security researcher, Kevin Beaumont, discovered that you can completely compromise this. So if a hacker gets into your organization, he can grab everything that, researchers are working on, or proprietary intellectual property, so on and so forth. And so he announced this at the end of May, and Microsoft pushed back on it, and they said, they can't exfiltrate it. The activity is, secure. And so this guy published a how-to on how to exfiltrate it in an automated fashion. And so this thing has completely blown up, and Microsoft has backtracked very hard. They basically stalled the rollout on Recall on June 7th. They did an update on the 13th and saying, well, we're going to put this in preview and take some more feedback. So they were completely caught off guard by the reaction to this. It's kind of interesting, but anyway, for those of you not in Microsoft shops, this may have gone completely outside your notice, but this Recall thing is kind of a security mess that Microsoft completely stepped in. There's something else that they just did too. I think they added a Copilot, not a widget, but something akin to a widget to the Edge installs on Windows servers that people didn't want. It's like, I do not need intrusive, security compromising stuff stuck on my servers that I'm administering, installing tools or security implementations. Anyway, Microsoft's been stepping in it a lot lately. But that sort of segues to what Apple is doing, because the Worldwide Developer Conference just happened days ago. And a huge segment of their keynote was discussing their version of AI, Apple Intelligence. So to Apple, AI means Apple Intelligence, not artificial intelligence. And it's interesting, as they were talking about all this stuff, it felt very much like Microsoft's implementation of Copilot for Microsoft 365. And so wherever you have writing tools in the ecosystem, for example, notifications, it's smart enough to figure out which are likely to be the more important ones and sort of rearrange your notification queue, newspaper style, where the most important stuff is at the top and the least important stuff is at the bottom. If you are writing an email, you can say, you know what, I need to proofread proofread it or rewrite it to be more friendly or professional or concise, or do, key points or a list or what have you. So you can just sort of, do some word vomit onto your email and it'll sort of figure stuff out for you depending on what you're up to. I read something interesting. Oh, this was actually about Microsoft, but one of their options in Microsoft is to say, rewrite this as a poem. And they were talking about this story where people are supposed to fill out their end of quarter review surveys, and they weren't getting them done. Finally, their VP sent out a poem reminding them to get it done, and everyone was so struck by that the uptake was a lot higher. So kind of fun. So writing tools will be implemented. It also does generative image generation. So if you say, hey, someone's having a happy birthday, and you can take a image of that person and sort of cartoonize them with a birthday cake and balloons and stuff like that, or say your mom wears a superhero cape. I mean, kind of fun, but I don't know how much I'd actually use this. Action stuff. So you can say, play the podcast that my wife sent the other day, or create a folder called sketches, or email this to that. And you can refer to people by name. And if you say, I'm thinking about having a meeting, and during this meeting, I'd like these things to happen, or these people to be invited, you can sort of chain events, and it will recall the last thing you were talking about. So if you first say, Fred Flintstone, and then you refer to him later as him, it'll know what you're talking about. And so you don't have to be super explicit. So all these sorts of actions are now going to be enabled with this. And then the other aspect of this is what they're calling personal context. So it's like, hey, we need to push our review to 5 p.m. We'll meet outside this particular location. See you then. So it knows that it's today's design review. It's at this time. It's at this location. It's like, okay, that's great. But then it's also going to know, hey, my kid says I have a theater thing that I'm going to be in. Here are the details. It's in a PDF. And it's going to say, okay, you need to be at point A at this spot and point B at this spot. And here's how much time you have to get from point A to B and how long you can stay in your meeting. And so it can work all that stuff out for you, know who your kid is, know where your kid wants you to be, know what time your kid wants you to be there, and what are the logistics in, getting from A to B. And so it's just interesting stuff. I think the beta is out now if you want to, be brave and load up a laptop with a beta version of the operating system. But it's kind of neat that this is the kind of stuff that's going on, in our very next release of the OS and the iOS, not just Mac OS, but iOS. For those of you who haven't watched the keynote yet, if you pull up the keynote, all this AI stuff kicks in at about 1 hour and 4 minute mark. So that's where you can find it.
Chris, what I understand, a fair amount of the AI stuff is not in the betas. It's coming later this year, coming next year. So not everything that they showed is available now. In fact, a lot of it isn't, and they'll be rolling it out over time.
Yeah, great point. So it's not all there. I guess another thing that was mentioned is sort of a key point is that most of what they want to do, they believe they can do it on device. And so they're going to have what they're calling an LLM. I'm not sure how it's going to be. It might be a small language model that they can park on device. And that'll do most of the stuff is sort of what they led us to believe. And then if you need more horsepower, there's like a virtual private cloud with compute capability that you can then avail yourself of. So it's called private cloud compute. It's, an Apple walled garden. The data is never stored, only used for your requests. They're willing to have the privacy aspects of this independently verified. Siri can communicate with it by voice or text. Siri will be aware of whatever you have on screen. In fact, my Siri just popped up on my phone as soon as I started mentioning this. My phone's lighting up. And it can act within apps and move data between them. So you could be like having a text message with somebody and they mentioned wanting to have a meeting, and it can, sort of from within the text context, create a meeting for you. And they mentioned that the on-device models will have approximately 3 billion parameters. And they also announced that they are having a collaboration with OpenAI. And Beverly, did you have a thought on this?
Mostly I wanted to say that just watching the AI part of it is good, but it really helped to have a context of all of the new OSs for each of the other products. And then the AI ties them together. So for me, it was really helpful to watch the whole thing.
All right, great. And I had, what else was it? Oh, that there's a Apple collaboration with OpenAI. And as some of you may or may not remember, OpenAI was co-founded by Elon Musk. There was a falling out. And so he did not react well to this news. So he said he was going to ban any carrying of Apple devices if OpenAI is integrated at the OS level. And so if you go to, you know, any of those companies, SpaceX, what have you, he's going to demand that you stick your Apple device into a Faraday cage and you can get it back when you leave the premises. So that was kind of fun. And yeah, here's the bit about the Faraday cage at the bottom. And so he, of course, took to X on this and started crabbing about Apple's not smart enough to make their own AI, et cetera, et cetera. They're selling you down the river. And then his own feature about verification of facts on X said, hey, actually, this is how it works. Runs on device, more compute, private cloud compute, and there's actually a link to the article on the Apple website about how all this works and what the architecture is and what the parameters are. So it's kind of fun to sort of see him shake his tiny fist and then get fact-checked by his own platform. And just as a refresher, Elon Musk threatened to sue OpenAI. And then OpenAI published all his emails saying, fine, I'm going to take my bat and ball and go play my own game. And after he did that, they were supposed to have a hearing about OpenAI's motion to dismiss on Wednesday, and then Musk dropped the suit on Tuesday. So it sounded like he was sort of stoking outrage for as long as he could and then didn't bother to pursue it into court because he was going to lose. Anyway, this is the I don't know if it's a blog post, it's more like documentation that the fact checkers were linking to, saying, here's all the details on Apple's on-device and server models. So this is interesting for those of you who want to sort of get ahead of the game and read up more about it. The URL is on the bottom here. And then also, speaking of AI contact, Beverly, you want to talk about this?
I wrote a blog post, and it really was meant for general audiences, and tell me the terms and tell me what's new in FileMaker 24 and put it out there. And Richard said, oh, finally, FileMaker AI for Dummies created this, showed me this graphic like about 2 minutes before he actually posted it to that blog. So it's Richard. What can I say?
And your blog post is at the URL on the bottom here. So for those
Correct.
of you who haven't seen it yet, check it out. Let's see, switching to more general tech news. There was a study done by Bamboo HR, and they surveyed more than 1,500 people, and they were asking about return to office and what the motivations behind it were. And more than a third of the respondents in leadership role believe their companies had undertaken layoffs in the past 12 months as a result of too few people quitting in protest of return to office mandates. So they were intentionally forcing people back to the office in the hope that large numbers of them would quit and save them the trouble of having to do layoffs and paying severance and stuff like that. So for, you know, some significant percentage of companies who've been trying to force RTO, this was a calculated move trying to get people to quit. So for those of you who quit, you played right into their hands. You should have held out because they would have laid you off anyway, and then you would have gotten some money for it. Other news, Raspberry Pi, the maker of the single board computers that are about the size of a deck of cards, they just had an IPO. It's interesting because they're a nonprofit foundation, and it looks like they sort of took OpenAI's lead, where you have a nonprofit that owns a for-profit that does revenue, and you sort of do an IPO to sort of fund the good stuff you do in the foundation. So this synergy between foundation, nonprofit, and for-profit chunk of the organization looks like what Raspberry Pi did. Let's see, I have their press release here. They're saying this is a watershed moment for Raspberry Pi. It's been around for 16 years, started in the autumn of 2008. They have sold over 60 million low-cost Raspberry Pi computers. And the sort of full details on the IPO are at that URL on the bottom there. And then several months ago, I think 3 or 4 months ago, I talked about how your cars were spying on you and taking all your data and giving it to data brokers. And some people had gotten surprised by huge auto insurance hikes or even cancellations. And there was some backlash to that. People had thoughts, as you might imagine. And so one of the major data brokers, a company called Verisk, which you can see right here, they've been taking data from GM, Honda, and Hyundai and turning that into a driving behavior report that had like hard acceleration events or hard braking events and giving it to insurers. And it caused so much ill will that I'm guessing, they don't say it explicitly, but I'm guessing that the auto manufacturers didn't want ill will toward their brand, and so they shut it down, even though it was a revenue stream for them. So anyway, that seems to be a step in the right direction, but we shall see. You know, just because these guys stop doesn't mean some other data broker might not pick up the football and run with it. And now let's move on to Dot FMP. And so Dot FMP just happened, as Caleb mentioned. Several people on this meeting were there. It took place in Berlin. This was the 12th and final Dot FMP. The organizer, Egbert, has decided 12 years is enough, and he's happy to do it. We had a lot of good memories there, much time spent in the nearby beer garden. Some familiar faces here for those of you who might use Monkey Bread software. This is Egbert here, the organizer. And I guess we could just start. I mean, I could leave this up as sort of color, or we can just go back to the grid view. This was my favorite session by David Haman, who analyzed how account information is stored internally into FileMaker. And it got very gnarly, but it was interesting to watch. But let me stop sharing, and we can segue right into Dot FMP discussion. Who wants to go first?
I just have a comment. I mean, I have notes about several of the wonderful sessions, but you know, the idea that this is the last Dot FMP, first of all, I respect Egbert for making the decision that he did. It's a very tough job to host a big conference like that, as you know, the FMDiSC organizers can relate, I'm sure, doing a monthly meeting like this, you know, where they have to fill up a few hours of content. And of course, Egbert isn't responsible for the content, but that's, I think, the big loss is that I don't know that we really have any more unconferences. Pause on Error has kind of evolved into a different thing. And, you know, we have Engage You in several locations, I think, or, you know, at least one. But I don't know of any other unconferences where the sessions are self-scheduled and, you know, self-directed by the attendees. So I think it's a big loss. And I hope another unconference comes along to fill that gap.
Yeah, that's true. I think this was very similar in spirit and execution to the old days of, you know, Pause on Air, where people were standing in the bathtub and sessions would just sort of magically, organically appear. It's like, oh, I got a brainwave from that last presentation. Let's do this. And it's very much like Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland. Let's have a show, and people just do stuff. And so someone sees a hole in the schedule and they just fill it with things. So I pasted a link to the schedule at Dot FMP with all the different topics there. I think several of those sessions have files that are available for download. Whistleblower was one of the tools that was shown there. Whistleblower 2 is up there, and they gave a progress report. The whistleblower guys came on this meeting some months back and actually talked about what they had. You know, I thought the David Haman session on how account storage is done in FileMaker was fascinating. It was super technical. He was using Python tools to sort of tear stuff apart and things like that. But and so having seen the session and thought about it deeply, there's no way I could replicate his work, but he was able to dig in there. It was interesting stuff for me. Any other thoughts on favorite sessions from people who went?
Charles Delft was there from FM Better Forms, and he thanked Egbert because that's where FM Better Forms was born. It was kind of a cool attribution or thanking Egbert for creating it. And there's a little bit of a story behind it. I don't have all the details, but sort of like one thing led to another, and then, you know, kind of an affinity moment that happened for Charles. It's like, oh, wow, that could be something we could do. And, you know, next thing you know, FM Better Forms. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great origin story.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb, what was your favorite?
Well, my favorite was honestly the side conversations. You know, I had some great conversations with you and Heidi. I had some great conversations with Fabrice Nordmand. You know, audit logging, of course, in the context of the presentation I just gave, is a huge issue, and it's never been perfected in FileMaker. Fabrice has done a lot of work in that field. So he and I had a long side conversation about that on the third day. And I mean, that's the thing. The unconference format is just wonderful. But if I had to highlight a couple, so Joris Arts, you know, he gave, for me, it was, you know, I've never really looked very closely at Clara Studio. And of course, the one we have access to is quite limited. But Joris has access to the ETS program for Studio. And he developed a very impressive, for Studio, a very impressive dashboard with access to live data. So that was very interesting. That, you know, I think myself for sure, and probably most of us in this group today, haven't seen that. So that was really nice to see that that's coming sometime soon. A big leap up for Studio. Ian, who's in the meeting today, gave a great presentation on AI. What's your vector? Now, what's your vector? A deep dive into semantic search in 2024. I don't know, Ian, do you want to give a little, you know, overview? I mean, I found somebody made a comment, it might have been Charles. He said, if you don't know what do you say? If you don't know what a vector is, you're already behind the ball. And so, you know, thank you, Ian, because you're the one that keeps me, you know, at least almost on the ball when it comes to AI.
Now you're making me blush. Yeah, so I did sort of a deep dive into some of the new semantic search features, and leading up to it, I did a lot of testing of the performance of both. So the semantic search stuff involves a couple of phases. You've got a data preparation phase, where you generate the vector embeddings for the data. And then there's a second when you actually perform the search. So I spent a lot of time doing performance testing on that. And it was quite interesting because a number of things came out of it. And I've done a blog post on this. I know the guys at Beeswax have done blog posts on it as well. There's several others. But what I found was really, really interesting in that some of the default, when you're generating the vector embeddings, some of the defaults that FileMaker provides are not quite correct, and you can speed up the vector embedding by at least a factor of 2 if you change the default behaviors. And it is configurable. The other thing is search behavior is linear to the number of records that you've got in the system up to a point. And that point seems to be determined by how much RAM your server has. And at some point, it goes from being linear to like there's a big jump in the time it takes. And I posted on that. The other really important finding is that if you're trying to keep this short, but if you're doing search on embeddings, don't do it through a relationship. If you do it through a relationship, it downloads all the data to your computer and does a search there. And since the vector embeddings are very large, that slows it down a lot. If you're hosted, everything happens on the server automatically, and it's quite quick. Anything up to, say, 30,000 records will happen in less than a second. If you were to search 30,000 records through a relationship, it's going to take you like 5-10 minutes. So it's going to be really slow. So those are just kind of some summary things without going into too much detail. Anyway, that's...
Yeah, you walked us through some just practical steps for configuring it, like the configure AI account. You walked us through building this solution essentially. Configure AI account, perform semantic find, which is a query by natural language or vector. You talked about functions, the get token count, cosine similarity.
Yeah, the other really important thing is that, as Chris said, is that at the moment the system supports the OpenAI API, but not exactly. Because what they've done is at the moment it supports the wrong endpoint. And so if you're trying to do this on perform script on server, and you're not using OpenAI, but a local model, you need to change the endpoint and you need to change the port. So it only works on port 8080. Whereas if you're doing it locally, it'll accept the port. So it's a little bit weird in terms of how it's configured.
Yeah, and it's specifically for the embeddings endpoint. It's not for the other.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's correct.
But you need that for semantic search.
Yeah, indeed. So I think it's going to be really interesting, but I think that a lot of the really good use cases are going to be the ones that people aren't expecting. They're not going to involve someone typing in a question and having that question answered. I think it's going to be looking at the data we've got in the database and the embeddings, comparing it and giving us answers about that data. So maybe classifying images or text, that kind of thing.
Yeah, one of the things that Ian mentioned that I hadn't really thought about, and I haven't thought this one through, is just of the way you can add and subtract vectors, right? The similarities, and is there something there that can be useful to us? I don't know. But I agree with the biggest value not being the chat portion. It's more the what they've shipped here with the or chatting to and to search something, but some of the other search functionality, because and being able to do it locally, right? Not having to send it off to a service or something like that.
Yeah. If you're running the local LLM that the open source server they provide, the original documentation we got in the ETS was talking about running things on an NVIDIA, A100, which is frankly something that none of us have sitting around because they're phenomenally expensive. And most of the AI software at the moment is highly optimized for NVIDIA GPUs. And NVIDIA GPUs are just absurdly expensive right now. So I think that what we're going to find is a lot of the smaller models that are not as capable but are highly focused on specific use cases are going to be the way to go, because that'll enable us to use the realistic kind of compute that we've got available in most cases. So yeah, there's quite a number of things there. So I'm just finding it a fascinating area. So.
A comment I was gonna make on Charles Delph's session. So I ran out of David Haman's session so I could watch Charles's session. And he had a fun use case, because I think that's what we're looking for is, which use cases will really provide a true return on investment to our clients, right? Is this at a point where, what are the specific things that will provide that? And I might not get all the details right, but the gist of it is that it's like a scenic company, so film scenes, and I'm sure David Knight is familiar with this, but basically they ingest the script and use some LLM AI to pull out scenic elements and be able to because that is one thing that the LLM's pretty good at is extraction and summarization, right? As you've seen from some of the Zoom recording summarizations. And so there's a lot more to their solution than that, but it was a fun presentation on, that was just one of his use cases, but it was kind of fun.
Yeah, that was a really
and he saw J-Lo when he was on a film set, but she didn't say hi to him and he didn't say hi to her either.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's talking about that as well. All right, we should probably wrap it up unless there are any final thoughts you had, Chris, either for the Roundup or for Dot FMP.
No, there's like a lot more content there that I think would be great for us to pull into future meetings and have people do their presentations. And so, to be determined as we're planning out the next few months meetings, that I'm guessing we can get some of those speakers to come present to the group.
Well,
great
can I just add one more thing? We did do, who here went to our AI FAFO workshop? Did anyone go? Ian went. So we basically gave a little sample file of the AI FAFO. It was called AI, F around and find out. And a lot of people in the session, just stuck it into their file and tried out semantic search. And, we just had a little Q&A, and that was kind of fun because it, it's a thing where you don't get around to it until you get around to it. But, we just took an hour and had people get around to it. So it was fun.
To me, the most amazing part of that was we had the entire workshop. There were probably 20 people in there doing embeddings on the same key. And some of them were embedding thousands of records. And by the end of the session, we had only used like 79 cents worth of compute.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty sweet. So
Sounds interesting. It sounds like something maybe you guys could share at a future FMDiSC meeting.
Well, it's got to be people are going to have a solution ready and go, but yeah.
Right. Or even just to describe it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I had made this file not knowing if Claris was going to release. And so I thought, well, I'll have the file, and Chris was my helper monkey, and I'll have the file. And if they don't release, then we'll do it at meetups or something like that. Cause it did not take me very long to put this together. Chris commented it for me, so that was good. But it was just a way to get hands-on, simple, start getting hands-on and see what happens. And then I told them I was going to leave the API key active for like an hour afterwards, and I didn't want to forget about it because that's happened before. And so I turned it off, and then everybody's like, wait, stop working.
The only thing there, just Chris talking about the cost, is that when I did my presentation in Antwerp last year, in terms of cost, I managed to spend about $27 in OpenAI API charges in under an hour. So depending on what you're doing and how much data you're pumping into it, you it can be expensive.
Yeah, I think people were being considerate because remember a couple people asked, do you care if I send 2,000 records? And yeah. So I think they're just trying to be considerate.
Yeah, the stuff I was doing there was I was sort of doing several a large number of hours of video transcriptions. So I was pumping a lot of data through it, and yeah, it's surprising how quickly it can become pricey. Oh, the interesting thing is that actually some of their older models, if they're deprecated, get more expensive than so you need to keep an eye on that. If they deprecate a model, it'll become more expensive than the newer, better models.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to,
Anyway.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to pause recording.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. All right, our last presentation today is by Bill Bennett, who's a first-time presenter to FMDiSC. So, Bill, welcome, and thank you for offering to present. And the floor is yours.
Back to me.
Pleasure. My pleasure. What an honor. What a group. It's so cool. It's fun to just be on with Bob and learn a little bit more about the backstory of this. Obviously, I've heard about FMDiSC from so many people for so many years. So it's really cool to get to be here. We've been on this call for a little while, so I know people are probably a little bit exhausted, or maybe also just kind of double threading, and as we all have to move our days forward and make a living and all those things. Tons of great learning already for me on these sessions, and just fun to riff and learn about global health, and great to get the updates from Chris Moyer on global health. My wife and kids and I actually lived in Rwanda in East Africa for a number of years. So it's interesting to hear your presentation, Caleb. And in a couple of weeks, we'll actually be coming through Dubai to visit a teammate over there, and then back down through Rwanda. So we'll kind of be in your neck of woods. About fortified products for American consumption. My fraternity brothers had a innovation that was a late night inspiration, which never quite took off, but they called it fortified beer. So if you ever see fortified beer someday, maybe as we're all getting a little older and maybe some of them have made money, they can actually make a go of it. But fortified beer, I don't know if it's a thing yet or not, but they were all about it. Yeah, can't wait to dive into some of this material. I have learned so much in doing this presentation a number of times, and so cool to just riff with, I think Tim Chimbura is on here, or was on here, and he had some just great insights and feedback, and how he's been selling successfully for many years. Dave Knight and I had a great session kind of over at Engage after this over by the stairwell, and just kind of riffed back and forth. And I think that's what we're going to do today. I'd love for this to be interactive. Chris Moyer's comments from last time we were together as well have really stuck with me as well, just around, Chris was saying, like, look, I was emphasizing a bit around gravitas in the sales conversation, and Chris was saying, hey, that's not my experience at all. I find we can just kind of keep the fun going, and actually we don't need gravitas. So this is an evolving set of ideas, an evolving set of guidelines and principles for how we can all elevate the platform. And we do believe that if we elevate the platform, we're all going to win. So we'll dive in. I'll pop open the screen share, and we'll have some good discussion, a couple different breaks. We'll also have some exercises. I've sent you a Dropbox link here directly from a zip that has a few things in it. So if you're curious, you can kind of look ahead, and we've got a couple little FileMaker files in an Excel document, and we'll dive right in. Awesome. So as we're talking about, as Beatrice was just saying, this is a framework, and we engineers, we love frameworks, right? We love to be able to say, hey, where's my checklist? And we are going to checklist the sales process to the extent that we can. We also know that we really have to stay kind of holding that checklist with an open hand. We've got to follow often as much as we lead conversations. So let's start off with this question. What do we think of when we think of a salesperson? I will ask if you wouldn't mind to just kind of pop off mute. Let's just popcorn out a few ideas. You know, what do you first think of when you think of a salesperson?
Aggressive.
Aggressive. I hadn't heard that one before. Love it.
Well,
I
from a
tend to think
positive
of
point of view,
Let's go with Caleb first.
just for, looking at it from a positive angle, I would say, someone who's helping to define value in an engagement.
Okay. Yeah, they're at the outset. They're ideally, they should be helping us define value. Okay, next person. I'm not sure who that was.
Well, I was thinking someone articulate, but who can also listen well.
Also a positive. Sure. Maybe they're aggressive and maybe they're going to bring in a lot of value, but they really do need to listen well.
Someone skilled in the art of persuasion.
John points out that look, ultimately they are going to be persuading people, and they should be good at that, at those micro skills that go into that. A few other ideas.
I generally tend to think biased because they have an agenda.
I've heard this one a lot, Steve, that they're bringing in their own agenda. They have a thing that they're driving forward, and therefore there's a degree of bias there, a degree of partiality. They're not an impartial sort of a consultant advisor like we would hope that we are as engineers. Maybe one last one and we'll go on to the next.
Ethical, doesn't try to sell you something you don't need.
The best sales folks have a degree of ethics that they're coming in with, and they're filtering. They're saying, hey, is this the right fit for the platform or for our team? And we're going to hear those no's from a great salesperson as often as we're going to hear yes. I've actually even read a book that's all about that having a couple of good no's, and I've had some of my colleagues do this on calls where I'm like, wow, they're bringing a lot of truth, they're bringing a lot of no, and it turns out, man, the client called us back. Oh, amazing. Sometimes, yeah, we do need to say no as much as we say yes. Just a couple more. How does that contrast, do we think, around, kind of the ideal engineer?
Very fact-based.
Okay.
Objective.
Jonathan says the engineer may be more objective. Caleb came off of mute.
Yeah, I was going to say, kind of the opposite of seeking value, seeking perfection.
That sometimes the engineer perhaps is, they're going to be oriented around the product and around getting it done, perhaps a little bit less sort of business orientation.
More process driven.
Okay, the salesperson may be a little bit more comfortable with kind of free flowing, and that engineer is going to want to go, well, 1, 2, 3. Let me take my pre-flight checklist and do it the same every time. Someone else came in off the mic there.
Oh, I was going to say, I think of sales engineers specifically as having a greater depth of knowledge of the process or the product or whatever they're selling, than just a salesperson who may have more superficial knowledge and is more focused on, promising versus delivering.
Love that, Lynn. And that's a great one to kind of bring us home as you started to really marry the two together. And of course, this is a role and a role that a lot of us have played. And I like to think that a sales engineer can be some of the most value producing sort of roles or jobs on the planet, right? If you can marry these two skill sets together where you're comfortable with the winding path, and you're also comfortable with process, you pursue perfection, and you also do so with kind of honoring the stakeholders, budget and those other sorts of things that ground us into reality. I like to think of Steve Jobs himself, that that perhaps there are these archetypal ideal sales engineers who have the vision and who also have the execution. So fun to think about this. This was a very positive group. I've gotten a lot more negatives on a few other calls about how salespeople can bring a lot of yuck, can bring a lot of awkwardness, and we heard some of the agenda, that sales itself can be awkward or uncomfortable. I'm often in a place where I'm chatting with some of our teammates who say, I've got this opportunity. Would you follow up on it? Because I hate to sell. So what we're going to talk about today is that why we should love selling conversations, why they actually really are fun, and why they are helpful. And I believe to a degree, even an engineer who sells has a degree of nobility. One of my 3 sales mentors would always say this to me: people don't like to be sold, but they love to buy. And what we're doing is we're in the sales process. We are being impartial consultants who are simply just not getting paid quite yet. So that's a part of the conversation is how do we get to the place where we can work together? Of course, but the ultimate act of going through a selling process with a really qualified and good and caring sales professional shouldn't necessarily have to be so difficult, so uncomfortable. As long as that sales professional is bringing kind of the right goods to the conversation here. What we'll talk about today is I'd love to share briefly my journey of learning to sell. We'll go through a couple of exercises. One is a checklist that's in those downloads. We'll get into the 4-step framework here, which I've listed on the right. I'll move your all's faces in and out a little bit from my Zoom controls here. We'll step through how to build out a good problem definition, how to start to generate some solution alternatives, how to pitch the winner, and how to go through kind of the approval process. We'll do a value analysis exercise. That's that big Excel document if you want to look ahead and have a few takeaways and conclusions. Let me hop over to the chat here. Alexi, a great sales engineer. Awesome. I don't remember, but that's cool that you guys are riffing over there. So my name is Bill. I'm down in my father-in-law's basement here in Chicago, actually. So we're up with the in-laws, and my kids have been loving time with grandparents in the pool. We have 4 kids, and we're based now in Cincinnati, Ohio. As I mentioned, my wife and I, about 11 years ago, we moved to East Africa, to Rwanda. I was working at Soliant Consulting at the time. I was the director of strategic growth, and I was also a professional classical singer. So I did lots of regional operas and weddings and funerals and church and temple, and lots of big chorus gigs, like with the Chicago Symphony Chorus and the Lyric Opera Chorus. And my wife was a lawyer at a big law firm. So between kind of those 3 careers and then starting to have a family, we needed a serious just kind of pivot in our life. We called it sort of blowing up our life. We needed a change in a big way. And so she pursued a fellowship with a human rights organization called International Justice Mission, and she became a prosecutor prosecuting crimes of child sexual assault. So it was really, really deep, difficult work, and that's really what brought us to Rwanda. But through that experience, we actually met all these amazing college graduate, hardworking, trustworthy, really smart, capable folks who wanted a shot to kind of compete in the knowledge economy. And actually kind of this crazy story of our very first sale. We moved there. We didn't even have a car at the time, right? Because cars in Rwanda with import tariffs are just extremely expensive. And so we were taking motos and walking everywhere and trying to just piece it together. And I met at a family gathering. I met this guy, and we shared a bit about what we did. And he was helping run a large coffee exporter that was called Rwanda Trading Company. And I shared about what I did, and he said, FileMaker, FileMaker, are you serious? He said, well, we've built all of these FileMaker tools to manage microloans, to manage our inventory, to manage contracts and commodities hedging, to deal coffee off to places like Starbucks and Pete's Coffee, and like he was literally like, "You need to start tomorrow." Like, I need your help. So it was a really neat story. I mean, it was literally their warehouse, their dry mill in the capital city of Kigali, Rwanda, was half a mile walk through the valleys from the place that we live. So it was just one of these just amazing coincidences, but I think a cool FileMaker story. And so I said to him, well, look, I'd rather kind of build up a team here to help support this, because they needed a significant rewrite, and they were doing microloans to 100,000 farmers, and it was a significant operation. And so fast forward, here's what our team looks like today. We have a hybrid model that we affectionately call Upshore. We're trying to make a positive social impact. So we're a social impact consultancy. About half of our staff is here in the States, and half of our staff is overseas, mainly in Africa. So that's our story in brief, and a bit of intro there. Feel free to jump in anytime with any interjections or thoughts too. But yeah, it's been a fun journey, and I'm delighted to get to share my story about it. I'll share a bit now about my selling story. That was maybe a little less sort of fun and linear, right? I came out of engineering school. I went to engineering school at the University of Virginia, and the thought of selling was a pretty big yuck to my engineering yays. I definitely had some of the like the young engineer, like I just want to put my head down and kind of check the boxes thing going on. But I think Bob Bowers maybe perhaps spotted a little something in me and said, "Hey, why don't you ride along with me when we're doing a couple of these sales conversations down at the University of Chicago or downtown at Citibank." And Chris Moyer was a part of that time too, and so I thank both those guys and the whole team. And really through that process, I think Bob in particular would beat me up a little bit with some feedback and say, "Hey, man, not all the world is a nail just because you got a hammer, and not all boxes need to be checked." We have to do a lot of listening, as I think Lynn mentioned right at the outset, and we've got to adapt our selling process to that person's buying process. And I would say as well, I looks like most of us on this call are consultants, but even if we're working on internal initiatives within our own businesses, or internal initiatives if we're in-house developers, or I would even say as a general life rule, now that I'm married and I'm a part of a larger family, right? And if I'm trying to influence anything that I can see in a positive way, my kids or even myself, I would say we need to be flexible with how we're going to adapt our selling process to that person's buying process. What's important to them, and that is a big part, I think, of becoming sort of excellent and a generous salesperson. When we moved to Africa, I met a guy named Dan, who was the consummate extrovert. We can often think of a sales persona being a bit more extroverted and perhaps an engineer being a bit more introverted. And Dan and I were definitely that. And Dan brought the fun. He brought the comedy, and he would do things like walk into a meeting and share something that was totally made up just to get shocked. He would say like, I was just talking to one of your teammates. It sounds like your competitor already launched the product, X, Y, and Z. And he would say, I'm just kidding. But what it would do is it get people's attention, and that fun and that laughter would build rapport and it would build trust. So Dan had some wisdom beyond just being sort of the fun sales guy. And then moved back to Cincinnati, Ohio, and cool coincidence that Stephen Gallagher, who was a foundational, I think, in building up the Claris platform in the beginning, when it was called Claris, he would join me on these sales conversations, and he would have all these amazing observations out of the sales discussions. When we would debrief, he would say, "Did you notice that guy in the corner over there, that was actually the buyer? It wasn't the person who was talking a lot. It was the guy who's been here for 25 years. And so that's a bit part of my selling journey. But it wasn't really until I was kind of had this cool magic moment. I was visiting my cousin's business. And my cousin's business had been started by my grandfather. And on my cousin's bookshelf were some of my grandfather's books, and they had his handwriting in them. And a good portion of those books were about engineering, and a good portion of those books were about sales. And I started talking to my cousin about his selling process a little bit, and just got a bit more curious and said, well, I know that I'm cut kind of from that same cloth. I'm an engineer like my uncles and my mom and like my grandfather. And but like anything else, it is a skill that can be learned. And I really believe that my grandfather was a good dude and had noble aspirations for how he wanted to grow his business and care for others. And I thought, okay, I'm in for a learning journey, and I'm going to read everything I can, and I'm going to ask for advice. I'm going to talk to smart people like Dave and Chris and Tim and everyone else on this call. And I'm going to say, how do you do it? What can I learn? And I can gladly say that I believe, since our early days, as we're tracking leads through the pipeline, we see something around a 2x of our conversion rates as we've really started to build this sort of learning sales machine, and as we've started to apply some of the frameworks and techniques that we've learned from that process. And we've got a small sales team now too. So that's I think a neat part of a sales evolution, is I'm learning to not just be a salesperson, but to be a sales manager. So that's my story in brief, and that's where we're at. Any thoughts, questions, and things that you'd want to highlight? We'll go in a little bit further, and then we'll have a couple
Bill,
more moments. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I do. You said one of your bullets there was adapt your sales process to the buying process. And that's something that really struck a nerve to me, especially in the context of, what I was talking about, working for these researchers who are employees of universities, but they're funded by external agencies. And, they have a very defined process of getting money for their projects, and they don't necessarily have any money until they're awarded, but they may need our involvement before that point. So, that was it still is a learning process for me about how to, basically help them along without costing me a whole lot of money and time before any work is awarded, so that struck a nerve with me.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, if you're selling in that kind of larger bureaucratic environment with RFPs and RFQs and all that sort of stuff, you've really got to have a lot of patience. And I also think you got to work quickly. You got to have your templates ready for getting a proposal out that maybe is 20 pages, but only takes you 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the cycle too, the sales cycle between pitching and the award could be months and months and months.
Yeah. And then one of the challenges in that environment that I've found too with trying to work with USAID and others in Africa is that it is supposed to be very impartial, and is obviously for very good reason. It has a lot of governance over top of it. And then you do also find that, oh man, the person that got that was, was having back office meetings. So I do think that there's still an element of relationship development and rapport and connection that needs to happen even through the paperwork process. Have you found that to be the case too, Caleb?
Well, yeah, and also your comment about when you were in a meeting, and then after the meeting, somebody pointed out, did you realize who the actual decision maker was? It's not necessarily who the decision. There's a chain of decision makers, right? But ultimately, it's not always who you expect is running the project. It could be the person who's most in touch is not actually the person who's making decisions.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah. Good. So let's go a little further. I mean, it is, your comments are really on point, I think, with this slide, right? Is we don't always have wins in the sales process. And a part of what we're trying to do is build a learning mechanism. And part of that is just like any other engineering discipline. It's applied science, where we have a hypothesis that we're testing, and we're simply getting feedback on our hypotheses that either is going to validate or disprove our beliefs. Was the problem big enough in the first place? Might be one of the questions we want to ask ourselves. Did we have the right people in the room? Did we have the best solution? Was there someone else in play? I try to not kind of beat ourselves up, but also after almost every selling interaction, I do believe there's moments where things are advancing very nicely and moments where there's potential for learning. And if we're going to build, sort of adaptive, evolving sales processes, I think some of these questions are great for engineers who sell to be asking themselves. There, in conclusion, kind of from this opening chunk, is that I'm in for sales personally, because I do see the connection with engineering. It's like anything else, that there is order to it. It is consultative, which is a skill set and a joy of mine. And look, flexibility is a big part of a great engineering design. So yes, there is a high need for flexibility, but so does the Brooklyn Bridge. It needs to be able to sway in the wind. Otherwise, we might have a problem. I do believe that sales can be purpose-driven. It can be noble. One of my grandfather's books was hilarious. It was just so dated. It was from post-war Reconstruction, post-Great Depression, and they were talking a lot about the need for elevation of the sales role, because salespeople were traveling around trying to convince everyone that it's okay to participate in this economy again. And so they're trying to punch through the fear that is very natural that could have taken place. And we're in a kind of a similar moment here, obviously, with post-COVID. And we do still see that there's a lot of fear, some of it perhaps rational, and some of it perhaps irrational, where we're, as noble salespeople, we're out there and we're trying to build the case for those that should be investing and that want to be investing. We're helping to try to do the types of research that are going to help them move forward, and we believe that ultimately is a good thing. And then, lastly, is that boy, whether I like it or not, everybody sells all day, every day. We do in our home life. We do with our colleagues. We're always relaying perspective and trying to understand and listen well. And so, okay, maybe these skills, maybe picking up a sales book and actually reading it is not just a yuck. Maybe these are something that I can be into. Lastly, would be that I want to elevate my perspective of who I am in that room. Bob used to always talk about this idea of we can be almost like a medical doctor in terms of the way that we're relating. That we're the professional, that we've got a framework in our mind. We know the DSM, the diagnostic, whatever. But we're also going to be having a rich eye-to-eye conversation where we're doing deep listening. And it's that unique combo, and perhaps that we need to wear white coats with a label or something, but it's that combination that gives us, I believe, a degree of that impartiality, and that there's a process behind it. We're not just going to say, hey, take 2 of these and call me in the morning. We're going to ask a lot of questions. We're going to ask why a lot. And we're going to try to really get to the root cause to be as helpful as we can be, as opposed to perhaps kind of the traveling salesperson who just wants to kind of get the deal booked, who doesn't actually really care about the underlying symptom. So any thoughts and reactions to kind of this whole idea of like sales nobility and the medical doctor analogy? Does that resonate?
I'll pop in, Bill. I think,
Thanks, Dave.
to your point, yes, and first and foremost, great presentation and great metaphors and great use of different thought channels. Yeah, the doctor, I always tell people, you have a sore knee, let's try therapy, let's try analgesics, let's try surgery as a possibility. What are the options available to us? Let's help prescribe. First, let's acknowledge you have pain. Secondly, let's look at the various courses of action we can take and which are going to be the best for you in terms of I use a Jerry Seinfeld quote all the time. He has this great comedy bit where he says, you walk into the drugstore, you're looking for painkillers, and you go, do I want fast acting or long lasting? And you have to ask yourself, do I want to feel better now or later? And that's a really great approach to customers sometimes who just need a quick little fix versus somebody who really needs a wholesale organic change to what they're doing. And those have different timelines and costs and risks associated with them. So the other thing I like two other things I'll just bring. Number one, not just the selling, the reselling of a project. I find oftentimes customers, they start getting the bills, you're in the middle of the process. Or what have you. It's very valuable to get back in front of those customers and go, here's where we're at. Yes, you just had surgery. We're going to have rehab. We're going to have PT, and you're going to be better in a couple of months. So a lot of the time, there's some customer handholding that needs to happen, not just at the onset of the project, but at multiple points, and good, quarterly business reviews with your clients to kind of keep abreast of where they're at. So the selling process shouldn't stop just because they signed a contract. It needs to be revisited at periodic points along the way.
And I'd like to add on to that too. I think that going back to what you were talking about, listening, like a doctor listens to a patient, right? I think there's a delicate balance between the amount of talking you need to do and the amount of listening you need to do. Sales is about selling your product, right? Talking about what it is you do, and anything that they say to you is going to be something that you can think of a use case from another time, or a way you solved a similar problem, and oh, well, here's what we could do. And sometimes you have to stop yourself and just shut up and say, yes, I know I could say something here, but it's okay to have a little silence in the conversation. You don't have to fill every moment with talking. Sometimes they're just thinking and gathering their thoughts, and you have to give them that space to do that.
Love that, Bob. Thank you. Lynn next, and then we'll go to Ian.
Yeah, I wanted to say one of the things I like to bring to my sales calls, which I don't make many of these days, is I want to have a very clearly thought out system of ethics about what I do, what I will and I won't do for a client. And then within that set of ethics, try to do whatever I can to fit myself into their corporate environment and culture, and make sure that they have what they want without doing something I shouldn't do. And I have had clients ask me to do some sketchy things, and that's part of where my system of ethics has evolved from. But in the listening, you have to do it not just to what they say or say they want for but what the underlying whole structure of their company and their needs and their interaction in their environment with. They may have customers themselves that we need to serve well. And that was kind of okay.
Love that. Thanks for sharing that, Lynn. Appreciate it. Ian.
Yeah, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm really, really bad at the sales process. My question is,
me too.
Thinking
well,
like
you're
a
in the right
medical
spot.
doctor, I guess my problem as I see it is that in the sales process, so that knowing what needs to be done with the client, frankly, that's often where the value is. And delivering a FileMaker solution to fix that is often the fairly mechanical part of things. May upset some people by saying that, but it's true. So how do you avoid giving away that, like the value in the process? I'm thinking back to about 10 years ago, I had this very large proposal for a very large system. And in the proposal, I basically said, here's what we're going to do. And they went ahead and they actually implemented themselves the first part of what we said we were going to do. And they basically said, why should we pay you guys like £100,000 to do this when it took us 4 days? But in the proposal, I basically had told them, here's how we're going to do the tricky part.
Right. Gave away all the secrets.
How do you avoid giving away that? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, it's a good one, and I don't know. I'm thankful I haven't seen that too often. I mean, maybe others on this call have some specific ideas. I guess I would say maybe the first rule of thumb is if you're sweating to be, and we'll have a little checklist exercise that we'll do here in a second, but if you're sweating or you're investing into that sales lead, are you seeing equal and opposite investment from their side? Are they putting in the effort? Are they doing the homework? Are they giving you back access to information? Are they introducing you to the right stakeholders? When those things get out of balance, perhaps, Ian, that's maybe one of the circumstances that could red flag that a little bit early, where they're kind of just using you a little bit to be an information pump. And so it's weird. We try to, and that's the purpose of the checklist exercise that we'll flip over to here in a little bit. In fact, we could probably even pop in if I can figure out how to hop out here.
Well, I was going to comment to that, Ian, that maybe part of your process is a little bit, I never put any specifics of development or even proof of concept in my proposal. That's for the needs gathering, the specifications process. I sell my specifications process and document as a deliverable. They can take that and go to another developer if they like. I mean, I've never had anyone do that, but this is why you pay for specifications. You don't pay for a proposal. And if you put deliverables into your proposal, sometimes you're going to lose, that they're going to say, yeah, why should I do that? Pay for this person to do it. And of course, they're going to get stuck in the middle of the process because they don't understand all the complexities, but they don't see that from the front end. So,
yeah, the doctor, to use your doctor metaphor, Bill, the doctor is not saying, I'm going to cut here, here, and here. I'm going to use this appliance to replace the knee. He's going to go, we're going to replace your knee. And in 3 to 6 months, you're going to be able to walk again. We're solving a problem. We're solving a business problem. So giving somebody the paint by numbers edition of the technology and how you're going to use that, maybe that can come later in the engagement after you're further along, or if there are technical people on the other side who really need to see that. But you should be in the initial stage of the sales process, you should be going, we're going to solve this business problem, generically doing X, Y, and Z. There doesn't need to be a deep technical dive given to the customer to be able to enforce what the outcome is going to be.
To Bill's point about, on top of everything that was just said, to Bill's point about, how invested are they in sharing information and being open? Wow, that really made me think about the contrast between certain engagements where you can feel that you're building trust with an engaged customer who really wants to work with you versus someone who's very guarded and maybe has a biased opinion about salespeople, at that phase of a project. And just how different those two experiences are when you have a customer who, for whatever reason, you've engendered trust in them. and then you start to get into this process, which is really collaborative in terms of designing a solution for them.
Yeah, Caleb, I could even go a little further on that. Thanks for that encouragement that's resonating, and loved your comments, Dave and Lynn, to Ian's question there. I have read and have heard it said, I do not fully subscribe to this, and so I repeat this kind of in hushed tones. But I definitely don't believe in sales gamesmanship or intentionally trying to make the other side sweat. However, I wanted to share that I have heard it said, and maybe some of you all have experienced that the reason someone ultimately buys at the very, very end, when they've got the paperwork in front of them and they got the pen in hand and they got the signature right there, is not because it's the very best deal or it's the very best solution or it's the very best price or because they love you. It's because of their own sweat equity, because dollars don't matter, time matters to people. And if they've put in 10 to 20 hours of homework with you over the stretch, then they're going to look at that sunk cost and they're going to say, no way am I going to kill that sunk cost. I've put in 10 to 20 hours with this group on this specific direction. Now, again, I psychologically, perhaps there's something that's cool there worth repeating and thinking about, and of my own buying decisions, right? If I'm down a path with a sales rep and trying to buy a certain product or licensing for my company, if I've worked really hard on building that case, there's a certain, I think, bias that I'll be taking into the decision-making process. But just to repeat, I don't use that as a form of gamesmanship. But I do think that there's something there that's helpful in terms of reading the tea leaves, right? Are we in this? Are we really having progress with this company or with this particular solution that we're working on? I don't really care what they say. I care what they do. What verifiable actions do we have to show us that they love us? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it just made me think of something that I was told many years ago by a VP of sales for a company I worked for in Canada, where he basically, when talking about a sale, was saying there's the two kinds of sales. There's like a big company sale where it's not their money. And then you've got a company where you're talking to the president of the company and they're thinking like this. Well, this is many years ago, but he's saying $50,000. Like, do I want this more than I want to buy a new Porsche? Do I or not?
Right.
Whereas if it's a big company, it's somebody else's money and there's less, they're a bit less concerned about that.
Right, they're not comparing it to the Porsche. Yeah, they're comparing it to, am I going to get accolades for this thing when it goes really well, or am I going to get yelled at?
Am I going to get fired if it goes wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Let's go a little further. And Jonathan, would you help me understand how we're doing on time?
Bill, you got about 30 minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. We're doing perfect then. So great. So we're right here at the You Are Here checklist. Our conversation has naturally really gone into this. I just invite you to pop open this this solution here. I started just kind of pre-filling it in the first section just to give you a sense of kind of how it works. You can write in any project or anything that you've been thinking about working on either internally or with someone else. And we'll just take a minute or two to kind of go through the checklist process. And doing so, I think if you can just lay hands on that for a minute, it'll elicit a couple of good questions and conversation out of it. I don't necessarily believe that all of these boxes need to be checked, and certainly don't believe that they need to be checked in the same order. As you think about these 4 buckets of big stages in a sales process here, you may fill up the first one a fair amount, and then maybe you got a couple of things coming in here as you start to get an idea of the solution, and maybe you're even sowing seeds into these other into these last 2 stages. But generally, just kind of read through this top to bottom and try to think of some idea of something that you were selling. I had in here a Claire Studio lead that we had that I started to think through a little bit. I'll pause there and just give you a few minutes with it. Okay, just maybe one more minute.
Bill, can you scroll through that one more time?
You bet. Let me know. Any thoughts, questions, any observations of something that you can see in here and you go, oh, that, all right, I'm not sure I really do that, or what is that one?
Well, I love the first one, Bill.
Yeah, boy, I just went through that with people just not really getting the right people in the room, or even, you know, returning calls in a timely manner. It's such a red flag, you know, and, you know, they can seem really motivated in what they're saying, and then their actions in this regard can be a much better indicator of how they're, you know, how they're really feeling about hiring you. And you know, and the same thing about, you know, key stakeholders. You know, it's sometimes sometimes they put up a firewall between you and the actual person who's going to make the decision, and that can be a red flag too if it goes on for too long.
Love that. Yeah, it is a bummer when you can't quite get the engagement. And I added one from Chris Moyer last time about, are we really confident that we've teased out the requirements and we've gotten to kind of bedrock there? And love this one from Dave. So I'm going to add this in right now. So we have a prompt. I wonder what section this goes in, right? But it's like we've identified the champion. Let's see here. Maybe that's just a part of this. Oh, it's sorted. So therefore that went to the top. But yeah, have we identified the champion? And that maybe that takes a little while to really to tease that out. Okay, we know who the stakeholders are. We're getting introduced to the people who have the right authority, but who's going to really champion this and move it forward? Love that.
Identifying the champion can be kind of informal for me in my process. Just knowing who, although before we do the final signing, I do get the decision maker, who may or may not be the champion, to identify that person and who's going to be my contact and my liaison.
Another barrier that I have found, not very frequently, but it can be a real issue, is being firewalled away from the end users. So the problem space is never well defined, because the major hierarchical stakeholders want to control the process to the extent of blocking access to the end users. And the project that was the most evident never went anywhere, because the major stakeholder decided to take a leave of absence. She couldn't delegate. Yeah, it was very depressing.
Yeah, someone mentioned that earlier on the call. I think it might have been Caleb's section about, like, gosh, it is mysteriously difficult, and it's always valuable to get access to end users. But boy, we get shielded sometimes, don't we? I totally find that's the case. Well, thanks for sharing that, Beatrice. I'm
curious.
Do we really have the voice of the customer kind of thing? It's so hard to get to sometimes.
Hey, Beatrice, I'm curious. What was the reason given for that? What was their
It was, not to name any names, pharmacy in a very large hospital is an extremely hierarchical structure. And it was due, I believe, to the very pronounced pecking order. And there was no reason given. It was simply that the person who was in control of the process did not want to yield any control to the people who reported to her. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll sometimes hear like,
Thanks for asking,
they'll just distract you. They'll tell you about the old way, but we're talking about a new way, and they really just don't know best. We know best, and sometimes I don't know if y'all experience this too. It happened to me on a sales call this morning too. They really want to show us the mock-ups or the workflow for the new system, and I'm like, yeah, that's great, and that's awesome. And can I also have access to your data from the old system, from your Google Sheets and from your Excel? Because it's sort of like, I don't know, I was taught to respect my elders kind of thing. It's like best predictor of the future behaviors, the old behavior. I want to know really where are we coming from. I don't want to just have sort of the executive leaderships who are all vision, vision, vision. I want to know what's reality. You know what I mean? So, and again, no silver bullet for that. And awesome comments on the chat as well from Ian too. So thanks for this. This is good. And you know, we'll build up the list as we go. And I think the larger point, right, is there really is a list, and we don't always necessarily do it in order. We can't guide the conversation fully, but we still need the checklist, right? So it's sort of like that medical doctor. They need to have the DSM memorized and then forget about it, so that way they can really go through actual diagnostics. Okay, let's get into some of the more nitty-gritty details, and this will just kind of have some tips and some ideas and some granular details about each of these kind of major 4 steps, although they might happen to a degree certain out of order. And then we'll have a little bit more time for discussion, and we'll wrap up in a bit. Problem sizing. It can be very tempting for particularly for those first conversation or two for the client, as it were, to try to just move us right through this without giving us the full skinny about the ROI or the value or the metrics. And because it can take a little bit of time for people to really trust us and to share kind of what's really going on. My teammate Colleen is on, and she's incredible with just being able to really ask why and to ask why again, and to really get to the cause behind the cause. And it takes a certain, in my estimation, I mentioned this earlier, that it takes a certain sense of gravitas to be able to kind of sustain that conversation and to be able to demonstrate some inference and get that rapport going in a nice way in this first conversation or two about all of the shiny coin cool things and about the stuff that they would like to accomplish kind of in phase 3. I don't know if you all experience that, but sometimes that's the start of the conversation is, and then we'll do this and we'll do this. And it takes a little bit of time and patience to get them back to the actual business case. So I like to just remind myself in these first conversations, I've got a little checklist to fill out. And in that checklist, I need to know how big is that organization? How many people are we really talking about impacting? What's a handful of metrics in terms of how much efficiency we're gonna bring in? If they're telling me about, some mistakes or blunders that might happen, I always try to ask the question, has that happened? Could you tell me the story? Bring me back through the case where you're telling me about the potential for someone to fat finger data and for us to fail an audit. Have you failed audits in the last year or two? And that's when it may even be a little bit awkward, but hopefully they'll actually share with you. Actually, yes, just a few months ago we did. Tell me the whole story. How much did that cost you? What did that look like in terms of the consultants you had to bring in to get it uprighted? You sent the wrong product to the wrong customer. Ouch. So ultimately, this first step for me, the visual is kind of like sitting in the pain, right? It's like it says in many faith traditions, we're supposed to weep with those who weep. we've got to sit in the pain for a little bit and not solutionize. I think that could probably even be hard for a medical doctor too, right? If they're going appointment to appointment to say, oh gosh, can you tell me more about why this stinks, why this hurts, where it hurts? But we've got to do that as sales folks as well. We got to sit in the pain. I like to add to that also try to capture a couple of quotes about that pain and quote the person right back to them. Chris, I love that. Absolutely. The NDA will come up in those points. You know, maybe that's a good litmus test, Chris. Is like, you know, you're on the right track if they say, can we have an NDA? If there's no NDA yet, then yeah, maybe we're not asking, you know, sort of deep enough questions. I like to try to grab those quotes and those metrics. And as I said on the checklist, which I don't know if it's articulated or clear, but I like to try to socialize that. So if we've got 3 or 4 people that are on these conversations, then and maybe one of them is not able to join, or the boss has been CC'd, but they didn't join the call, I like to try to share and to try to get the organization to talk. Because if we can all be working from the same playbook and we've kind of got a running list, this is the mission, this is the new project that we're all talking about, these are the business objectives, and we keep repeating that and kind of showing that back, then we start to build up kind of a sense of a snowball toward progress. We also, from time to time, will pull together something a bit more formal. Now, this is like fully baked, right? I think Dave at Engage said this is, well, what did you call this? This is like our this is our engineers. You might not remember, but it was something. It'll come to me in a second. But I appreciated the comment in the presentation. This is an example of kind of like a value generation framework that maybe is a borderline, you know, sort of management consultant. In this case, a particular client of ours had a lot of these numbers, and they were already starting to bake this up. So what we were really just trying to do is to help them put it down on paper. But ultimately, they may come to you with a lot of ideas for cool opportunities, and we're going to sell more, we're going to do more. Efficiencies is a really easy thing often to capture here right at the outset. Is okay, we're talking about a team of 20 people, and how much time do we think we could save? Well, you know, we do X orders in a day, and those orders typically take us whatever, and we think we could get that down to whatever. You know, 90 minutes down to 10 minutes. Okay, well, great. Let's multiply that out. Let's put that in terms of a real number and see if we can actually get it articulated. But the biggest thing, beyond opportunities and efficiencies, if you can get a few of these risks documented, boy, you know, the CFO will love you, right? If you can actually articulate the business case behind a blender, audit, sending the wrong product, a lost customer. In my experience, and again, this is just a bit of color commentary, that those risks seem to, particularly for that very first initiative, they seem to really cut through it and help you make a bit of progress. So let's see, what's this next one? I mentioned this already a bit, but like asking bold questions at the outset, I think is perhaps a little daring. They're going to maybe give you an NDA there, but you know, even asking like, what kind of budget do you have, and how big is your business? Sometimes people answer in terms of revenue and other details that are helpful to share. What else are you working on? There's a classic marketing article that I read years ago that's called "When Coffee and Kale Compete." Often our competition is status quo. It's paper and pen. It's, well, we'll just keep using the whiteboard, or I'll keep using my phone. It's not actually some other, you know, friend competitor from the Claris marketplace, right? It's very much apples and oranges. And so at the outset in this first phase, sitting in the pain, establishing the business objectives, and trying to get in to the underlying why is a part of kind of what we've experienced. Any thoughts, questions, reactions, observations to that?
Quick observation. So in your step 1, you said you're not trying to drive to the ROI directly, but then you showed the spreadsheet of the value proposition. So are you saying those are 2 different steps? Like the first one is just like getting to know you, and then you dig in deeper, or I'm just curious where those 2 connect.
Thanks, appreciate that, Caleb. For me, ROI is different than value. Value generation can be full-on open-ended. ROI has to do with the costs And I'm not so deep in this area, but that's the kind of what I was trying to articulate here is that that ROI may not actually be what's driving the decision. I know that this solution is going to make us $1 million. You can either charge me $50,000 or that person over there is going to charge me $40,000. I don't care about 50 or 40. I'm all about value, right? So I do try to focus on kind of the upside value creation, and I don't have like a denominator, if that makes sense. I'm not sure. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, you're pointing out they're two different metrics. I get it. Thank you.
Yep.
One other subtle point, Bill, I think when you're selling to a larger organization, the wherewithal to do the justification stage that you're talking about here. Hey, a 5% efficiency gain in manufacturing. A lot of times, a lot of what I see in the FileMaker community or SMB, a lot of small, medium businesses, you're sitting down with a shop of 10, 20, 30 people. They may not, they go, look, we're drowning in paper, et cetera, et cetera. We just need to get rid of Google Docs, et cetera. So they may not have the temperature or the fortitude to want to go through this part of the exercise. So a lot of the time I will again, I tell them we're the Sherpa, we're going to guide you through this process. We're also going to tell you what we've seen historically. So for me to walk up to an organization and go, look, you got 10 people, average salary here, the average worker salary in America is 75 grand, along with X number of benefits, et cetera. You guys are spending 800 grand a year on payroll. If we make them 5% more efficient, and this system can be rolled out in 6 months, it's going to pay for itself well within the first year, and then you're printing money after that. So that's, or to tell a story, hey, we saved a company like yours $3,000 a month on paper use. So we think we can do the same with you. So I think a lot of it is that. One other thing that I have noticed, we sell a lot here. And one of the things that I would tell you is back in the day, 5 years ago, it was all about ROI, efficiency, dollars, efficiency.
Yeah.
When you're talking to business leaders who are younger than what we're used to, it's all about quality of life. We watch people respond to, oh, we're going to save you, $10,000 a quarter with this new system. And they go, oh, that's nice. You talk to some younger users and go, hey, we're going to get you home from your job, an hour early every day. And that has a much higher buy-in with certain organizations. So your ROI needs to really scratch them where they itch.
Love that. Yeah. And your teammates are going to be sitting on the system all day, every day. And that is their impression of who you are. And, your website looks gorgeous, right? Because you wouldn't have your customers interact with something, but boy, that system that you're having, your teammates sit on every day looks like, something else. All right. We've just got a few minutes here. This is such a great dialogue and discourse. I love it and don't want to stop the flow. You guys have the slides here, and we'll kind of bring the plane down here. A couple of just key points as I cruise through these last couple of slides is that if you picture these as 4 conversations, and maybe it's actually 2, but and they're condensed, but I do like to, without belaboring it, I do like to reground and reconfirm. Really, before we start moving on deep into solution development, let's just really confirm and restate what we talked about. This is the main problem that we're trying to solve. These are the biggest priorities. Is that still correct? Did anything change since we last talked? Because if it has, then it's kind of like, do not pass go, do not collect $200. We really need to kind of reconfirm briefly. It also shows them, I think Chris had mentioned in our last call, there's little moments of like, hey, I remember you. And I remember what we talked about, and I made a little inference here. I made a connection to a different story. Those can be kind of magic moments right at the outset. I'm ready for this conversation. I expect that hopefully you are too. We start getting into solution development. Ideally, we're bringing a couple of options, right? And ideally, they're at the whiteboard now, and they're walking us through. And that we're getting to exercise, as Bob was saying, a lot of time to just, even if we know where they're headed, like I'm smart, I've done this a dozen times yesterday. yeah. Let me grab the whiteboard. Let me grab the marker from you. No, that would never happen, right? In a good selling conversation, we just have to sometimes just sit and take notes and listen and have them get up and walk us through what they really envision. We like to say and put right on our website, your vision, we're in. It's your vision. What you need, as Dave was saying, is a Sherpa. If you're on conversation 3, you really kind of want to restate conversation 1, and you want to kind of briefly restate conversation 2. And if anything's changed about those 2 things, we need to go deal with that first before we're going to come in and we're going to really pitch. We might have talked about 3 or 4 different ideas, but let's pick a winner. Let's come in with advice, particularly as a medical doctor, right? With that analogy, we do ultimately need to weigh in as a consultant, and we say, look, there's a lot of trade-offs here. You may have a lot of questions or even fears about which one to pursue. There's no way we can know for sure, but here's the recommendation. Here's the game plan. Providing that confidence where there might be a gap. And lastly, we don't want to waste the approval process, and particularly for those bigger, more bureaucratic processes. It can just seem like paperwork, but it actually can be an opportunity to start to build rapport with leadership, with management, with other departments. And hopefully, if we're doing our job really well, then we're going to be selling as we execute, as Dave was saying, with some of those quarterly business reviews, to say, how are we doing and what's next? And the approval process of the contracting and the other things that have to happen can, and sometimes a little bit of back and forth and negotiating around scope and what's the most priorities. These can be great opportunities to really kind of sharpen the tip of the spear. In conclusion, I really believe that doing good work is sales. I can sometimes feel like a conflict in my role, as I'm sure we all do. Is like, should I bill some time? Should I put a little extra coat of paint on that solution, or should I get out there and kind of hunt? And I do believe that we can take a certain, kind of just piece from this idea that if we do really good work, really work that we're very proud of, that our whole team is doing work that we're really proud of, that will beget new work. Sales is simply consulting before we're getting paid. So I believe that, consulting is great. It's fun, and sales can be great and fun. It does take time. And then, but I think we can really build, tremendous value for our clients and for our teammates, for ourselves, for our families. If we can, in particular, build a sales learning machine where we're doing things like this, we're discussing it, we're learning after every meeting, and we keep after it. That's what I got for you. Thank you so much for this. I've got some suggested reading in here as well. A couple of books that are top of my list, and really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate your
Thank you.
sharing with us, and also making it, such an interactive conversation. I think that was valuable.
Awesome. My pleasure.
All around. So that's going to do it for our meeting today. I want to thank our presenters, Caleb, Chris, and Bill, and we will be back next month. Lynn Allen's coordinating the next meeting. And
July 12th, we have a lovely meeting already set up. Colleen Hammersley is going to be with us for an interview. We're going to have Rick Hellman from Claris. He says he's got some things to talk about. And then we're going to have Josh Orman talk about clarity in coding. So looking forward to it.
That sounds great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend, and we will see you next month.
Thanks, JR.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Jonathan.